This is not a video about saying yes to everything in D&D. Certainly, I say no to a lot of things, including unplay-tested homebrew. Specifically, I'm going to try to express why I believe that DMs should be focusing on allowing the players a certain amount of autonomy, rather than focusing on trying to preserve the tone of the game. Matthew Colville is a person with a lot of experience with RPGs, but consider my own experiences. I have interacted with DMs and players on Discord, Roll20 forums, D&D Beyond forums, all sorts of message boards, social media, Twitter, Facebook, what have you, Instagram a little bit. And you know what? I do have a little bit of experience of what's going on right now, especially in the online D&D space. I've also dealt with a lot of real-life D&D situations, including running games in public libraries, comic book stores, lots of board game stores. But I think I'm going to be focusing more on the D&D online environment right now and what I have experienced personally. Please bear in mind that as a creator and top D&D influencer, I'm well aware that I can't get decent feedback from my audience. I don't think any creator can. So, my views are culled from the interactions that I had online with mostly strangers, people who didn't know who I am, who didn't know what my content was, and I was mostly interacting as a player. So, while I don't think Colville's video is bad on its own, I do believe it will reinforce some of the trends that I have personally witnessed online. I have played in games from many exotic locales on the internet. And I will tell you that I've not really encountered many DMs who had a problem with saying no. In fact, quite a few DMs start saying no during the character creation process, and it never stops. Can I play a dwarf? No. Dwarves are rare in this setting, so no, you cannot play a dwarf. Can I do point buy for my stats? No, you can't do point buy for your stats. We're using a rolling stat method that I found online. No. You can't negotiate with that NPC to figure out what's going on. That doesn't happen until later on in the script. I mean, campaign. No, you cannot use that appropriate spell that's in the player's handbook because I think it's too overpowered. No, you can't have standard equipment. No, 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 no. An entire litany of no's. This is common. And yes, I understand in the book it says that the DM is the final arbiter of rules. What the DM says goes. Unfortunately, this is such a widespread thing that most of the games that I encountered online, they bore almost no resemblance to 5e, which is fine if you want to do that. But if you do fundamentally change every aspect of your game, then do not advertise it as 5e anymore. You have changed it to the point where it is no longer 5e. You can't say that you are running a 5e game looking for new players if you don't use anything from 5e anymore. And yes, this is incredibly common now. People even tag their games as Forgotten Realms games, and they don't take place in the Forgotten Realms. And it's incredibly unfortunate given how welcoming the vanilla rules are to new players. So this seemed bizarre to me because a couple years ago, the big advice was to not be precious with your D&D game. Allow players and their PCs to directly impact the story. This was the overwhelming attitude in D&D just a couple of years ago. The attitude of yes. Not just an attitude of yes and, but rather allowing players to make meaningful decisions in the game, which will have some sort of impact, even if that means discarding what you as the DM prepared. But lately, that seems to have changed. War has changed. I can understand why DMs are flocking towards the philosophy of no. Players and player choice can be really annoying, especially with new players. In fact, I believe most players will end up doing heinous stuff in the game, such as goofy behavior and doing crimes in a fantasy world. Stop right there, criminal scum. In my opinion, you just have to provide some structure and maybe some minor consequences at this stage, and allow players to slowly ease their way into the game. Eventually, most players will start to take the game more seriously. Matthew Colville has a different philosophy in this matter. Years ago, he uploaded a story to show the players the result of their interactions with some NPCs. He wrote an entire narrative cudgel, making damn sure the players understood what the fucking tone of his game was. And a cudgel, no matter how skillfully crafted, is still but a club meant for a blunt force solution to a problem. I bring this up because he claims in his most recent video that he doesn't understand how to force a player to abide by his way. Between you and me, Matt, yes, you do.
Now, this is my nonsense, and I do not expect my players to strictly abide by it. But while I don't try to force my players to play elves my way, I don't even know how I would do that.
Yes, you do. Because that's all they value. All that matters to them. We don't matter. Law don't matter. Wonderfully written. And perfectly clear what the results of this little formula are. Players know act right in game. Plus, story make feel bad in emotion. Equals, players act right and proper from then on. Matthew does indeed know how to force players to play his way to protect the tone of his game. Emotional manipulation. By any other name, it would still be DM bullshit. For a writer like Colville, it's not hard. In fact, one could argue that for that specific game, that was indeed the correct way of going about doing things. But to me, it's just another way of saying no with extra steps. From my perspective, I don't see any difference between this approach and the sort of ham-handed railroading that players complain about when their DM is not around. With the one key exception being is that you have to be a good writer to pull off the narrative cudgel, or it just turns into railroading. So I hope you understand at this point in the video where I'm coming from. It seemed like there was a lot of good advice out there for DMs about not being precious about your game. And now there seems to be more videos like this. And I just don't see how that's going to improve anything, especially for new players in the online space. Here are two hard facts from somebody who's been in the online D&D space recently. Number one, there are not that many good writers out there who are DMs looking for new players. Number two, there are a lot of DMs out there that think they are excellent writers. You see, Colville was making some important distinctions about why saying no was critical for both the structure and integrity of the world he was trying to create and share. The video seemed clear about that. Do I personally think that the majority of DMs watching that video will be able to fully understand those distinctions and implement them properly? In one word, no. The level of your average DM's creative writing that I have encountered recently is the equivalent of, I don't know what example to use, a pie into somebody's face. Banal, uninspired, stale, boring. This is reality. While everybody can enjoy a collaborative narrative, not everybody is a professional writer. That's just truth. So players inevitably end up creating their own fun in games like this. Should they be punished with no in a game where the narrative/tone is probably already limited. In a perfect world, the answer continues to be no. With the vast majority of D&D games that I've seen online, collaborative storytelling, even just fucking around, will always be superior to whatever is in that DM's folder. Because again, the amount of DMs that are out there looking for new players, the amount of them that are actually good writers who can actually craft a decent narrative or story or setting or anything, is nil. There's really not that many of them. So perhaps influencers shouldn't be giving out so much advice to limit the player's autonomy, given the D&D landscape we are in right now. Maybe, just maybe, we should consider the player's plight a little bit more than the DM-centric view. Players need all the help they can get right now, especially if they are looking for online games. Like I said before, sometimes players just have to go through a growing process. They have to stretch their clumsy wings first before they can soar with lofty ideals, like role assumption, to steal a term from Gary Gygax back in 1985. Will this video help any of the DMs that I encountered recently online who have fully embraced the power of no? Well, I mean, no, probably not. I mean, maybe like tangentially. I mean, perhaps indirectly. It might help in some small way to put another perspective out there. And hopefully some players will understand that the first inklings of self-determination, no matter how crude, should not be shut down by the DM just because he doesn't want to interrupt his gloriously created masterpiece. It is your game. Your game to raise to glorious lofty heights or have some fun wallowing in the dregs. It is your game as a player. Do not let anybody tell you differently. Thank you for watching the video. To anyone out there who's upset that a tiny channel went and did a response video to a large channel, well, let me help you out. Go to Google and search the phrase parasocial relationships. There are a lot of people that are having a tough time of it right now. Maybe now's the time just to relax a little bit. You know, stop taking our board game so seriously. Stop being so precious about D&D, and just let the players blow off a little steam right now. It seems like the right time.